You set a sandwich down on the counter for maybe 10 seconds. You turned around to grab a napkin. When you looked back, the plate was spotless, and your dog was standing on the far side of the kitchen, jaw working slowly, wearing the expression of someone who has absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Or maybe it wasn't food. Maybe you walked into your bedroom and stopped cold. Your favorite pillow was on the floor, completely gutted, its stuffing spread across the carpet like a crime scene your dog had zero plans to help clean up. Or maybe it happened quietly. A worn t-shirt vanished from the back of a chair sometime in the afternoon. An hour later, you found it in your dog's bed. Intact, untouched, just relocated, just claimed. On the surface, these three moments look identical. Your dog took something that wasn't theirs, but they are not the same thing, not even close. The dog curled up on your t-shirt, the dog that shredded your pillow, and the dog that inhaled your sandwich while your back was turned. Each one of them is running an entirely different psychological program. And when researchers started putting dogs inside brain scanners and designing controlled experiments to study exactly these kinds of moments, what they found turned the simple idea of my dog is being naughty into something far more complicated, far more nuanced, and honestly, a whole lot more fascinating. It smells like you. The quiet version of stealing is the one people misread the most. Your dog slips a worn t-shirt off a chair, carries it somewhere soft, and settles down on top of it. No chewing, no destruction, no chaos, just contact. In 2015, neuroscientist Gregory Burns and his research team at Emory University published a landmark study in the journal Behavioral Processes. They placed 12 dogs inside an fMRI scanner and exposed each one to 5 distinct scents: the dog's own scent, the scent of a familiar dog, the scent of an unfamiliar dog, the scent of a stranger human, and the scent of a familiar human. The results were striking. The familiar human scent produced the strongest activation in the caudate nucleus, the region of the brain tied to reward processing and positive anticipation. And here's the part that should stop you for a second. That activation was stronger than the response to other dogs. Stronger, even, than the response to food. A familiar smell, your smell, specifically fires the same neural circuitry that lights up when your dog is expecting a treat. To your dog's nervous system, a worn shirt isn't a piece of clothing you forgot to put away. Neurologically, it's a concentrated delivery of someone it loves. Veterinarians have understood this for years, and they've built clinical practices around it. When a dog has to stay overnight in a hospital, the standard protocol isn't to leave a toy or a bone, it's to leave something that carries the owner's scent. Not as a sentimental gesture, but because it produces measurable physiological results: lower cortisol levels, reduced heart rate, and a significant decrease in restless or anxious behavior. Your scent functions like a mild sedative for your dog's nervous system, a mild anxiolytic, to use the clinical term. So when your dog takes that ratty old t-shirt and drags it to their corner of the house, they didn't steal from you. They went looking for the strongest source of comfort available in the building, and they found it. The best game they ever invented. Then there's the kind of stealing that comes with eye contact. Your dog picks up the TV remote. They stand perfectly still in the middle of the living room, and they look directly at you. They don't bolt. They don't hide. They wait. What they're waiting for is your reaction, because the last time this happened, you shot up off the couch, said their name in a very specific, very charged tone of voice, and crossed the room toward them fast. You stopped everything you were doing. You engaged completely. And from where your dog was standing, that was absolutely spectacular. The remote was never the point. Your reaction was the prize. This is operant conditioning playing out in real time. Your dog performs an action, the environment delivers a response. And if that response is rewarding enough, the behavior reinforces itself and grows stronger. But the specific reason this behavior becomes almost impossible to undo has to do with something behavioral psychologists call a variable reinforcement schedule. You don't respond the same way every single time. Sometimes you chase. Sometimes you trade a treat for the remote. Sometimes you try to ignore it. Sometimes you can't help laughing. That inconsistency, that unpredictability, is actually the most powerful reinforcement pattern in all of behavioral science. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines so difficult to walk away from. The randomness of the payoff is precisely what makes the behavior stick. You never know which pull is going to pay out. So you keep pulling. Your dog never knows which stolen object is going to trigger the spectacular chase, so they keep testing. And that full-speed sprint through the house afterward, the wide looping runs, the sock dangling from their mouth, the glances back over the shoulder to confirm you're still following ethologists, have a formal name for that. It's called keep away, and it's a documented form of social play. In puppy behavioral studies, keep away appears right alongside play bows and exaggerated approaches as part of normal play repertoire. Your dog didn't defy you. They invited you to play using the most reliable strategy in their entire toolkit. They picked up something they knew you'd react to, and they waited to see if you'd take the bait. Built to grab. There's a reason some dogs do this compulsively and others barely bother, and the explanation stretches back thousands of years before any individual dog alive today was ever born. Every domestic dog carries a behavioral chain inherited from wolves that ethologists call the predatory motor sequence: orient, eye, stalk, chase, grab, bite, kill, dissect, consume. Wolves run the full sequence, but across millennia of selective breeding, humans amplified certain stages of that chain and suppressed others, depending on the job each breed was developed to perform. Herding dogs were bred for intense eye contact and stalking, with the grab phase almost entirely removed. That's how a border collie can control the movement of an entire flock of sheep without ever putting a tooth on one of them. Retrievers were shaped in the opposite direction, a soft, persistent grab and carry with the kill and dissect phases completely bred out. That's how a Labrador can bring a bird back from the water without a single puncture wound. Terriers were built around an amplified grab and shake the kill-bite stage, deliberately intensified for hunting vermin underground. In 2024, a study published in PLOS ONE, led by researcher Mikel Delgado, analyzed behavioral data from more than 73,000 dogs using the CBARC database. Retrievers, spaniels, and pointers were dramatically overrepresented among dogs that compulsively fetch and carry objects. That same grab-and-carry impulse doesn't distinguish between a tennis ball and your slipper. When your golden retriever trots through the living room with your shoe in its mouth, looking immensely satisfied with itself, that isn't bad behavior. That's a working trait that was engineered across centuries of selective pressure. A dog with a job hardwired into its brain and no job left to do. They know when you're watching. Food theft operates on an entirely different level, and the research surrounding it reveals something about your dog's cognitive abilities that might genuinely catch you off guard. In 2013, researcher Juliane Kaminski and her colleagues at the Max Planck Institute published a study in the journal Animal Cognition. They set up an experiment where food was placed in a room and a human explicitly forbade the dog from taking it. Then, across multiple trials, they varied the lighting conditions in the room. Dogs took roughly 4 times more food when the room was dark compared to when it was fully lit. Here's the critical detail. The variable that predicted stealing wasn't whether the dog could see the food. The food was always there. The variable was whether the human could see the dog. A separate experiment by Brower, Call, and Tomasello, published in Applied Animal Behavior Science, replicated the same pattern using physical barriers instead of lighting changes. Dogs consistently took food from positions where the human's line of sight was blocked. That is not impulsive behavior. That is perspective taking. Your dog is actively constructing a mental model of what you can and cannot perceive, and adjusting its behavior based on that model in real time. Countersurfing isn't a failure of training or obedience. It's a demonstration of cognitive flexibility that most people would never think to associate with the animal currently finishing off your dinner. The difference between collecting and destroying. There is a distinction buried in all of this research that changes everything about how you should respond to your dog, and almost nobody makes it. A dog that carries your slipper to its corner, circles a few times, and falls asleep on top of it is engaged in low arousal comfort behavior. It's a modern expression of an ancestral instinct called caching the drive to gather and protect things of perceived value. The behavior is calm, purposeful, and contained. A dog that reduces that same slipper, or your pillow, or a couch cushion to a pile of fragments, is operating in a completely different physiological state. High arousal destruction is almost always a signal. Under stimulation, frustration, or anxiety that has built up and needs somewhere to go. These two dogs require two completely different responses. Treating them the same way is one of the most common mistakes owners make. And one particular finding from the research explains the single most maddening part of the whole picture. Researchers Call and Mills, publishing in Animal Cognition in 2008, gave dogs a choice between familiar objects and novel ones. Dogs chose the novel item in 76% of trials. Your dog doesn't ignore its own toy basket because your belongings are inherently superior. It ignores them because they're familiar. Your shoe is interesting for the exact same reason you'd choose a new restaurant over eating at home again. Novelty is intrinsically rewarding to a brain that's built for exploration. This is why punishment almost never resolves chronic stealing. The research consistently points toward enrichment as the real solution. Rotating toy selections, so nothing stays familiar for too long, scent-based foraging games, structured problem-solving challenges that require genuine mental effort. When a dog's need for novelty and cognitive engagement is being met through other channels, the appeal of your shoe drops dramatically, not because the shoe is gone, but because your dog's brain finally has something more interesting to work on. The teenage thief. If your dog is somewhere between 6 months and 2 years old, and the stealing feels constant and relentless, there's a specific biological explanation for that. In 2020, researcher Lucy Asher and her team published a study in Biology Letters that tracked dogs through adolescence in detail. Around 8 months of age, dogs became significantly less responsive to commands from their caregivers, began displaying more conflict-driven behavior, and started testing limits in ways that mapped closely onto the dynamic between human teenagers and their parents. The effect was especially strong in dogs, with less secure attachment to their owners. A large-scale longitudinal study published in the journal Animals in 2025 by Kinsman and colleagues drawing on data from the Generation Pup cohort confirmed the same pattern at a much larger scale. The peak proportion of young dogs displaying problematic behaviors lands squarely at 12 months, with 42% showing at least one undesirable behavior at that age. After that point, the numbers steadily decline. In other words, that phase where your dog seems to steal everything within reach, test every limit you've established, and conveniently forget every command they ever knew, that isn't a training failure. That's adolescence. It's a developmental window defined by high impulsivity, intense exploratory drive, and self-regulation systems that are still finishing their development. And in most cases, with consistent handling and time, it passes. What not to do and what actually works. Here's a finding from the research that runs directly against the most natural instinct most owners have. In 2018, researcher Jacobs and colleagues published 2 companion studies in preventive veterinary medicine, drawing on survey data from 3,589 dogs. They found that physically removing stolen objects from dogs, chasing them down, prying things from their mouths, forcibly taking objects away increased resource guarding behavior over time. The dog learned that possessing something means confrontation is coming, so it started guarding harder, earlier, and with more intensity. By contrast, teaching a reliable drop command, using an exchange protocol, trading the stolen item for something of equal or greater value, reduced guarding behavior significantly. The dog learned that relinquishing something leads to a good outcome. That's a lesson that sticks. This is why behaviorists almost universally recommend the trade protocol over the chase and grab approach. The instinct to pursue your dog across the living room is completely understandable, but the evidence says clearly it makes the problem worse, not better, when it's not a game anymore. Everything described so far falls within the range of normal canine behavior. But there is a line, and knowing when it's been crossed actually matters. In 2021, researcher Sylvia Mason and her team published a study in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior. They examined 42 dogs that had required surgery after swallowing foreign objects and compared them against 42 matched controls using standardized behavioral assessments. In 88% of the surgical cases, the ingestion was primarily linked to a behavioral condition, hyperactivity, impulsivity, or an anxiety disorder. Only 12% were attributed mainly to a physical digestive issue, but separate veterinary research complicates even that finding. Chronic gastrointestinal disease conditions a dog can carry for months with no outwardly visible symptoms can also drive compulsive ingestion of non-food materials. A dog that repeatedly eats fabric, plastic, or wood isn't always a behavioral case. Sometimes it's a medical issue that looks behavioral from the outside. The markers that should prompt you to act. Your dog is swallowing what they take, not just carrying or chewing, but actually ingesting it. The behavior is repetitive and difficult to interrupt. It's escalating over time. Or you're seeing weight loss, vomiting, or unusual fatigue alongside it. At that point, this is no longer something training can address on its own. That dog needs a veterinarian, and it needs one soon. A dog that steals is doing something far more precise than just being bad. Its brain responds to the scent on your worn shirt the same way it responds to the anticipation of a reward. Its social intelligence is sophisticated enough to calculate whether you're watching before it makes a move on the steak sitting on the counter. 15,000 years of selective breeding gave it a grab-and-carry drive that doesn't know the difference between a bird in the field and your favorite sneaker. And its play instinct is creative enough to turn a stolen remote into an elaborate game, one it designed, cast, and directed, with you in the starring role. And sometimes, late in the evening, when it drags your sweater across the room and curls up against it, that's not theft at all. That's just a dog that wanted to be close to you.